Welcome back. Now it's time for Brad to tell us all about 1879, the great things he's been up to.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining in here. I've got a couple of questions that were saved in the general chat. I'll be going over those when we can get to it. By all means, if you have questions about 1879 or any of the subjects or anything that comes up, please add them to the chat. Unmute on voice. Feel free to let me know. I don't really have a particular agenda with this one. Mostly, I was going to just start out kind of talking about what we've had going on, where things are going, what we're kind of expecting to see as far as the products are upcoming, and then we would open it up to questions. So, yeah, by all means, at any point, you get questions that you want to know, jump in and let me know. So, if I remember correctly, the last time I did one of these, I talked about some of the future plans for things where we had seen with development upcoming. Since then, we have done the release for the SARD sourcebook that was out for last Gen Con. We're wrapping up the development for the Samset sourcebook that I'm expecting to see for this coming Gen Con, as well as the third part of the third and final part of the connection adventure. So we should see both of those products. The writing for that one's all done. The editing for the adventure's all done. That's just got to go to layout. Um, Writing for the Samset is being wrapped up. I've got 2 chapters in with editing. I have the introduction I need to wrap up, and the cities chapters are all being fleshed out. Some of those have been updated already, and then we just have final wrap ups as far as mechanics, professions, new goodies, all bunch of weird stuff that the Samset have done using with the Life Giver tech. So should be a lot of fun things for people to bring into their game. Uh, in Give you a whole bunch of just the oddities. A society that raises the dead and uses them for day labor kind of has some connotations to it, and we're playing a little bit into some of the Uki factor of where that comes in. So yeah, should be some pretty weird stuff that'll be fun for you to play with. After that, our intention is to do Creature of the Grove, which will be a big creature source book. Those are always very popular. So we're working with Don on that as far as the art side of things is concerned. That's part of what's it's brought in some of the creatures that are being done with the Creatures 365 project. It definitely will need some other artists and things contributing into that as well. So if you have ideas for critters and stuff, writing or art, reach out to us, let us know because we want to include all that stuff. That's more I'm going to have very open where it can come from either end. We can either have a creature that's developed on the art side and then we write rules for, or we'll have something we have rules for that then gets art developed. So it should be very open and free flowing. Along with that campaign, we'll also be doing a 2-part adventure. It'll be a single product, but it will have 2 aspects to it. Uh, that's going to bring the conflicts within the Grove to a climax. I won't spoil the plot, but there's going to be a British side and a side. One portion of it where you can play as the British, and then the second portion where you can play as the Samsut, and then that will kind of bring the climax we've been building towards, to a explosive end. After this point, we will then be swinging the pendulum back through the portal to the Earth side of things and start exploring more of the nations and developments and things that have gone on from there. First source book I'm planning after we swing onto the Earth side is going to be Union Confederacy and start laying pipe right away for the next story arc that we're going to be working on. And we'll be free to explore quite a bit through there, going through some of the various other nations, different areas to explore into. I know Joel said he has wanted to head a British Isles to be able to just expand out beyond Britain and London. So we've got some plans for that. I'm hoping I can get Chris brought back in to help with some of the Scotland stuff as well. Um, so in the works. I know this. There's been a couple of requests for a Canada source book. We'll see where we can work that in the production schedule. There was some work originally for Prussia and France. A couple of things for Russia as well. Mostly pipe being laid. I don't think we had an actual source book prepped. But a whole bunch of other things that we're going to be jumping around. So a lot of different areas to explore. So definitely, as we develop things out. If there's areas of the globe that you want to have explored, let us know because that can kind of drive where some of those things end up going. I'm open to doing general nations. I'm open to exploring specific cities. Um, I don't know that I want to necessarily focus on the cities as a primary, but definitely if there's something, if there's enough drive to explore a particular city in detail, we'll put the product out. This is one where I really wanted to have it driven by the fans to tell us where you want to hear about, where you want to adventure, and the whole world is open to us. I'm not stuck in one region or anything at all as we start exploring around. I will pause for a moment, one to catch my breath a little here, but I see there's some people talking in there. So if there was questions or anything that anybody had, comments, by all means, let me know. I don't want you to have to just sit and listen to me rant for 2 hours that I set aside for this. I was also born in Florida, although we moved before I turned 2, I think. Either just before or just after I turned 2. So yeah, not really raised in that area, that whole region. I don't think that I would necessarily consider myself a Florida man. Although, we do enough crazy stuff it could potentially. All right, not seeing any other questions come through there, so I will scroll my way back to the general chat because there was a whole slew of them here. Let me get back to it. There's the start of it. We had a bunch, and I gotta get back to the beginning of it. So the first question that was there: did the Great Dragons or Dragons period publicly reveal themselves in 1879? Yes, there are dragons who have revealed themselves as dragons. There's a dragon that has basically taken over Parliament and is taken over the House of Lords and has basically told them that it will be claiming that as its territory until they go and clean up. Caused a bit of a stir, and we had Mr. Fairchild go and speak with the dragon. Basically got told that yeah, there's a legitimate claim there. It really wouldn't be proper to expel him. So yeah, that is a task that Parliament has been given to try and clean up the river. That's just one example. Of course, there is uh, Mr. Park, who is in New York. Trying to think of the other great dragons that have actually been published.
Alamaze is mentioned in the GM's companion.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say, but I believe we had made mention of Alamaze at some point. I couldn't remember where exactly.
And there's Dragigok in Wales, who's a big Welsh dragon with a love of music, living in South Wales. Any similarities to dragons and other intellectual properties is purely coincidental.
Yes, and actually, we'll people in the pub, or at least Welsh people. We had to have the in the companion. I had to have the whole bit about the proper pronunciation of his name because that is a mouthful if you're not Welsh.
Just add phlegm and you're fine pronouncing Welsh.
Yeah, pretty much. Let's see. And second part with that, if so, is there any official hints about dragons being present in 1879? So yeah, he had mentioned with those. I don't know that they have necessarily. I don't believe they've given away who they are just yet. Although anybody who any of the immortal elves will know which dragon's which as they go through. But I don't believe they've given specific references to what they had done in the previous world to anybody who wasn't around. Same question for immortal elves. Official hints at Campbell. There have been some hints dropped, although not necessarily anybody specifically named. Uh, there have been the references to Mr. Fairchild, it being an immortal elf. Not any of them any that has been in published material. There is a story behind Mr. Fairchild that's a bit of an obscure one, and I kind of want to keep that one under the hat. So I may tell that to somebody in private individually if they ask about it specifically. But there is a source for Mr. Fairchild, but he's not in any of the previously published material. Any official hints at windlings or obsidian? I've made some allusions to windlings when we started talking about the Fae and possible connections there. That is intentionally left very vague and not really planning on delving into it too much, more just kind of hints and that sort of thing. Yeah, getting some. I've got some ideas in the back of my head on how things might connect, but most of that I want to leave open for people to have interpreted as they want within their own game line. So I probably won't do any sort of official references or anything there. As far as obsidian, there are plans to do some things with obsidian down the road. Not necessarily very good, particularly considering how industrialized and operations the British and people in general do. They're not very kind to stones. And they'll be in for some rude awakenings as the magic level rises up. As it is right now, it's still they haven't really come out of dormancy yet. But there are some plans for that as we start exploring more around Earth. And again, after we swing the pendulum back through the rabbit hole. Let me check back in with the main room chat here. My tongue in the Welsh people jokes. Yeah, the British, of course, don't bite their tongue on the Welsh people jokes. At least not in the time period. I think they do a little more now. Enter Fishbear campaign. Yeah, there's been a couple of people who have talked about playing into some of the connections between Earth Dawn and 1879. I actually had plans for a game I had been running before to do that. The game kind of fell off with scheduling conflicts, so I had done that myself. But I still have some of the ideas around and different things to play around with. Like King Savina, but I haven't cracked a book since Fort Alice came out, and I read that very deeply. What's the new cool stuff that will make me want to dust them off? So after Fort Alice, we do have the Sword Source book that is out and available now. The anybody who backed the Kickstarter on the way through. A lot of interesting stuff that came out with the Sword Source book, and a lot of it that could be applied within other aspects, like some of the skills and professions and that sort of thing. Uh, One in particular that I love was we came up with the brawler profession. Just within the Saurids, they have sort of the test of manliness, mostly among the plain swords, since they're male dominated, where you can go out and fight a beast and not use any weapons, just fight everything open hand. Being able to wrestle essentially, and particularly making use of their tail, and added some additional feats that they would have to or not feats. Why am I saying that? Knacks they would use along with tail combat for that. But the same profession could also be applied into like Queensberry rules and within the Earth and human culture and that sort of thing. So stuff that they can tie across the different lines mechanically would work similarly. And yes, I know Andy's all excited for Windlings. Windlings and Fae and fairies and all of that stuff. Yeah, you're gonna have fun when we do our actual play tomorrow, aren't you, Andy?
Hold on, baby girl.
I don't know if you're talking, Andy, but you're muted.
Yeah. Yes, I'm going to have fun. He 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 he. I like Windlings.
Yeah, just as you do
I
your
also like
evil laugh.
Obsidian. But yes, I am excited about Windling and Faye and seeing what you guys do with the Fae tomorrow.
Yeah, that one's gonna be fun.
I think so.
I gotta get the rest of those videos uploaded as well, so we have everything for the lead up to it. And sorry, I got our emotional support officer decided I needed a hug, so
Batsy's in my lap. She's just a lot smaller than Sunny.
Yeah, Sunny's 70 pounds. He's a big ball of
Gotti's
fluff.
Gotti's close to 90. And he's pretty sure he belongs in laps too.
I'm just getting a feline weather report here. It's wet.
Well, Sunny, it's not wet outside, but Sunny will certainly make it wet with his tongue. What? But Sunny, stop trying to hit the headset off my head. You already had food. It's not dinner time yet. If you haven't seen Sunny, by the way, check. No, he doesn't get food for another 2 hours yet. But it does say if you have not seen Sunny before, check out the Animal Companions channel. I post pictures for him every Sunday. Okay, can you hop down now, buddy?
So I have a question.
You hop down. Get your buddy. Go ahead.
So
by all means, everybody ask questions because I don't have an agenda. So
is there any plans to have like an event with 1879 that also affects the miniature game?
So I'm waiting for the updated rule sets and everything with the minis. Intention has been with the expansion of the different items we talked about, particularly with the swords, of being able to make a swords game or swords minis that can go along with that. So we do have the source book. You can do that once we actually get the updated rules and we can get all that perpetuated. I don't know that we're going to necessarily do an official like big event for it, just because people will play whichever game that they're wanting to play. But I do intend, once we can get everything finalized with the updated rules, to set things up so you can do a crossover between them. So, say you have your own campaign in the RPG and you want to do a mass combat, you could use the miniatures rules to cover that and be able to handle the mass battle and have your party running across the battle lines. At the same time, you could have the a miniatures game, and say you run into a small encounter where you decide you want to do this as smaller scale combat between individual units. You could then have characters for the RPG line and use those combat rules to handle that. I had rules for the old system for being able to convert between stats, point values from the army, and then bringing it into a character there. But that was before the rules revisions were going into effect, so that's kind of on hold for the time being until we get things sorted. But I at least have a guideline for how to set that up. And of course, as we expand through the rest of the world, we may end up adding additional, opening up possibilities for additional miniatures that you could use for other forces. Like, for example, the Prussians tend to have a lot more electrically focused units rather than steam. Um, there's the possibility of adding like steam mechs as a potential into things. Right now, they just kind of have the steam tanks and vehicles and that sort of thing, but not so much like a big mechanized unit. I figure we'll probably end up having all the mech groups coming in and making them steampunk.
Brave to assume they don't already do that on the other Discords.
Exactly. Prince Albert in a tin can suit. That actually is. We have that written into the game that Prince Albert does have a mechanized suit. That's one of the main points of history where it's up because it was involved in a carriage accident, and that's where Queen Victoria says, "I'm not losing my husband. I'm the Queen of England," and she puts out a whole bunch of money for anybody who can come up with a way to keep him alive, and they managed to do so. And he gets around in a giant mech suit. Well, not necessarily giant, but yeah, we did put Prince Albert in a can. What I really want to see is somebody have a mech suit that has a functional top hat to it. Like you take the top hat off and there's a missile in there or something like that. Let's see. I was just catching up on the comments here. Leave Obsidian for the Australia source book. Ooh, now that's a concept. I had not thought that far ahead into where they will get dropped. I know I have plans for dropping them in at some point. Although I may end up waiting more until a second edition thing for that to happen. When we eventually get to second edition, and again, I don't have specific plans on when that will be. I know the storyline, but I don't know date lines. When that's going to happen. But the intention is for there to be a major event that will involve the magic level bumping up higher and actually giving reasons for the mechanics to change. I don't want to just release a new version just to release a new version. Even though there are certain aspects with the game that I'm not 100% satisfied with for certain mechanics and things. It was first edition, so there were some things that definitely needed some adjusting as it got developed and as things have come out further. Um, Gradually trying to change some of those around. Like, for example, in the Fort Alice book, I introduced the mechanics for skills so that you had a method outside of combat and using skills to be able to train skills up and raise them a little bit more. You just didn't basically just as you use the books, you can gain tags if you spend the time outside of combat studying and using it. Obviously, certain skills you still need to have a practical use for. You can't go purely on theoretical, but certain things like language, mathematics, there's a lot of stuff that you can study and just use that way. You don't have to be not everything is melee weapons or athletics or something where you have to train your body. There are things where you can just train your mind and just spend the time to work on it. So then again, that's just one example of things that I've gradually been introducing to I think realign with some of the expectations some people have for how things would function and how I would want the game to function and make up for some of the deficiencies for things as I've run through it. and the actual play is very helpful for that as well, just giving me that other insight on things. And by all means, as always, please give me your feedback on stuff. I keep notes for all of that whenever I see somebody making comments for stuff and different things that when we get around to another edition or wherever I can work it in other rule books, as things come out, where I can help flesh some more of that out. Um, that's all possibilities for things that can be adjusted as you go. I think I'm caught up there. Let me take a look back on some of the other ones here. Okay, so going from the other questions, are there any hints that the Grove goes through the same magic cycles, including scourges, as Earth? No, as far as anybody's been able to tell, the Grove has a stable mana field. It's not as high as it would be in Earthdawn, obviously, since it's you don't have full on adepts or anything there. But it does not cycle higher low. It tends to be very stable. Uh, there's going to be some amounts of fluctuation and some fluctuation in area, just depending on how things function. Like, for example, as you get closer to the areas where the Samsit drained things down and had to move out, and even within their cities, there's a much lower mana field because the Life Giver's pulling that mana, out of the air, and it's collecting it into their own aspects. That's again something we'll touch on in the Samset source book, and how those things will be affected when you're in that area. But yeah, no major cycles as far as anyone has been able to see. Of course, most of like the British and anybody who's not an immortal doesn't have a reason to know about magic cycles. As far as they're concerned, this is still a new phenomenon related to the portal, but they will find eventually that there is a natural cycle to things. Let's see here. I'm going through the backlog. We had a big conversation talking about internal combustion engines versus steam and how things are different there. Again, I think I covered most of that. I may you delve into it if we end up not having a lot of questions and things, but if you since you're in the Discord, if you want to go back into the 1879 general chat, you can see that I pop in there from time to time and cover things as questions and that sort of thing come up. So, and at any point, if anybody has questions, jump in there and let me know. If I'm awake, I'll poke in and I will answer things as best as I can. Let's see. There was the next set. Are the people of Earth in general now aware of the concept of cycles of magic? So yeah, so tying in where I was at before, no, they unless you're an immortal or somebody who had lived through the prior events, they don't really have a concept that magic is cyclical. They know about the portal, and the resurgence of magic seems to be as a result of that. So that's kind of where they all tie it to, and they will eventually discover more of that, but that's not something that is widely known. So, and hey, run a campaign where they discover that sort of thing. By all means, that would be a really interesting one for them to start piecing together. Particularly if you had a group coming from the Earthdawn side of things and finding out about a lot of the history. Well, in 1879, it would be history. For the Earthdawn group, it would have been events that they had already lived through. Oh, and then we had train electrification, going to speed that up from the real world date of 1895, and we have magic trains. So the way Steam has kind of developed, things are going to stick with Steam for probably longer than they would have otherwise. But yes, things have been accelerated. We've already moved ahead with the auto stoker as far as development within Steam engines. For anyone who isn't aware of how that functions, you would have so on the footplate of an engine, you have your engineer, you have your fireman. Fireman shovels the coal in the fire, heats it, water. which then determines how much steam you can have. Steam engines within 1879 have taken a huge bump already. And again, me being a Steam nerd, it's not necessarily one that I would have liked, but it was developed before I got it, so I've kind of stuck with it. But just within the size and scale of how things developed, it has bumped ahead massively from where it would have been otherwise. Uh, and you can mostly see this and see we're already getting into the train talk, but for the game, so I can keep it important here. Somebody asked about trains, so you unleash the bottle. So the train classifications mostly go by white notation. It's one of the easiest ways to be able to cover those. White notation covers the wheel arrangements for an engine. So you cover the unpowered leading wheels, the powered wheels, and then you have the trailing unpowered wheels. So, like, second, for example, is an 060. He has no unpowered wheels up front. He has 6 powered wheels, and he has no unpowered wheels at the back. Uh, at the time when 1879 would have been going on, most of the trains really would have been more about, particularly in Britain, would have been more 440s, 4 unpowered at the front, 4 powered wheels in the middle, no unpowered wheels at the back. And that all just scales with how most of the engines have size. Primarily, that deals with the size of the boiler and the size of the firebox. As trains got bigger and needed more power, they needed a bigger boiler and they needed a bigger fire to be able to keep the water hot. As the firebox gets bigger, they needed trailing wheels at the back to be able to support that bigger firebox. And as you're generating more steam, there's a balancing act between being able to actually distribute all of the power that you're generating versus not having enough power to power all of the wheels you run. You put the unpowered wheels at the front, mostly to handle higher speeds, because that will kind of inform and guide the train as it goes down the track on what direction the rails are heading. So then you can keep everything aligned. It's with because otherwise the powered wheels are inflexible. They stay in a straight line, and they kind of have to bump and grind around the rails. But if you have powered wheels, you can kind of help prepare and guide them into the curves as they move around and maintain speed. So at this time, 440s in the real world would have been the big name in express steam. We've kind of jumped over that with how things have developed particularly with the development of the dreadnoughts. The dreadnoughts are 464s. I had to remember back in there. So they jumped ahead to the point where they would have the bigger boiler and bigger fire, so where they would need the additional trailing wheels. We've bumped that scaling ahead. Originally, they were written to be used with powdered coke. Now, trying to use powdered coke for an engine that big is ridiculous. And again, this was prior to when I came on. But just the amount of fuel you would have to go through is insane. It gives you an advantage for powering that because it is a powdered substance. You don't have to have a fireman sitting and shoveling in powering it in. You can run it with a pump, so you can automatically pull that through. Uh, because that is so insanely expensive, and again, this is put in with the Fort Alice source book, I've bumped ahead the auto stoker. Now, what the auto stoker is basically a big grinding spiral. So that will connect between the tender where the coal is located and the firebox. As the coal gets pulled by the spiral and it brings it into the firebox, it crushes it up and adds it in, allows it to burn more efficiently, and it's automatically pulling coal from the tender so that it can get into the firebox after the fireman can shovel. And if you were to try and put 2 firemen on the foot plate, there's just not enough room for 2 people to be able to work efficiently. you still have the firemen there, and the firemen can still shovel coal to tweak the performance, because there are certain engines that will develop specific hot spots and zones where the boiler really likes the fire to be in the firebox. But of course, you need the firemen still there primarily to monitor water levels and oil and all of that sort of thing. So things have kind of bumped ahead as far as Steam is concerned. And like I was saying, Steam will hang around a lot longer than it would have in the real world, uh, just because of the additional developments in the technology and where things have gotten pushed to. Particularly since Steam will have been around at this higher tech level for so much longer, by the time electrification, gas, all of that starts to come into effect, it's going to take those techs a lot longer to be able to catch up to the level where Steam is. um, so yeah, Joel, yes, I will let you go ahead and talk about your airship ideas while I catch up on the rest of the reading here, because I'm sure people wanted to jump away from the trades a little bit.
Okay, well, I'll just say I'm more of the airships than trains side of things. I've got 2 ideas that are beginning to be developed, which somewhat tie into a third one, which is one of Brad's pieces of, well, I'll say brilliance. The first one it's referenced in the Saurid book, but there isn't a lot of detail in it, but it's going to turn up more, is a weird scientist has been experimenting with airships with adding this mysterious true air you have in that we have mentioned, because we do have true elements like in Earth Dawn. So essentially building an airship where the main body of the airship is closer to neutrally buoyant, which means you don't need as much gas in it to keep it in the air. And also it means that if you cut your gas bag loose, you drop a lot slower, which really does a whole lot for improving survivability of crashes, which is currently speaking on the standard airship technology 0 for the most part. You have a small amount of fixed wing gliders that could be used as escape vehicles. And so I'm putting in hints towards people doing things with true air to create something closer to propeller driven Earth Dawn airships, just for fun mostly. The second development is, well, there's already fixed wing gliders knocking around in the system, but they are essentially ways of falling with a lot of style. However, in the Saurid book, I got to tell me, and Brad gave me the go ahead for them to have lots of weird science, is probably the best way to put it. They are essentially the keepers of knowledge for the Saurid. So the Saurid have, the British see them as a primitive culture, but it's not that they're actually primitive, it's that they've chosen to give up their technology to live a more pastoral existence, because of ancient history of the Saurid race. But they preserve all the knowledge so that if they need it, it's there, and also so that they are all making an active choice rather than having regressed. They're choosing not to live with technology. So while a lot of that is in biotechnology and the specific breeding of plants and things like that, and there's all sorts of nastiness there, they've also got small winged airships that are powered by, and I can't remember the name offhand, but a very specific type of engine that is a real world technology, but rather than using coal or fossil fuels of any sort to power it, they're using true fire, which creates a very efficient engine and essentially a fixed wing glider type thing with a propeller on it. I have plans for this becoming a second stream of airship design, possibly combining it with some of the true air to improve buoyancy, and all of these developments may well combine into, and this is where Brad comes in, the idea being that given the main airship technology drivers were the Confederacy, and as Brad points out, happily, if you give people from the southern states of the United of America any form of powered vehicle, they are going to try and race it.
This is the culture that created NASCAR out of moonshine runs. Yes, somebody's going to race these damn things.
So the thought is airship races in a NASCAR style, going as fast as possible in relatively tight circles with relatively tight ships, space between the ships. But I really like the idea of it becoming a breeding ground, a developing ground for several different streams of airship technology.
Absolutely, yeah. And that was even before we had gotten into that. I had that planned.
Yes, and it's just it's not just some of it. Some of it will be standard Giffords, as we call them, with gas bags, propellers. Some of them will be smaller, lighter, differently maneuverable winged aircrafts.
Oh yeah,
and
it'll start with the gas
just what
bags,
they can do
and
faster.
It'll start with the gas bags, and by the way, all the 1879 gas bag airships are soft-sided gas bags and hydrogen, not helium. So the hydrogen has a lot more lift. It's also a lot easier to leak out of the bag, and it's a hell of a lot more volatile. But somebody's going to realize, hey, this hydrogen gas stuff burns pretty good. Why don't we hook that up to a Stirling engine, and we'll just use that? We could do away with the powdered coke system for the micro steam, which they have done to some effects, and that was the engines you're referring to, was the Stirling engines.
That's the one, yeah, Stirling engine. Yeah. The Castalmi, the winged, the gliding saurids have Stirling engines that use elemental material, true elements to power them for extra efficiency. The other thought I'd had was that, given having looked at maps of where the lines between the two American states are, helium in the real world gets properly discovered 1900-ish. As far as I can work out, just north of the Mason-Dixon line. If the North then get to develop helium-powered airships, which are a little bit more ponderous because it doesn't provide as much lift, so they need a much bigger gas bag, but have that subtle tactical advantage of not being explosive. Probably not be as good for the race, I'll admit, but I don't think the North cares about that. They'll possibly be better for building big load haulers. So it's sort of I think the safest thing to say with the airships is we are sitting around, throwing ideas around, trying to work out how a essentially defunct technology that never really went a lot of places in the real world can be developed. And Brad's reaction to any of the crazy ideas we have is to laugh mildly and shout to do it.
Pretty much, yeah. I'm very open to the craziness.
So we've got some fun planned for that. Given some of the stuff we're doing with the Samsat technology, the other writers, I tend to handle fairies and weird cultures. Some of the other writers get handed the tech and just start chuckling merrily and just see what they can do.
We had so many fun conversations going into the Saurids, particularly with the aquatics, and just this is weird. How their culture could develop and come up with some of the crazy stuff that they use. And there's a lot of plans that we came up with there that we're kind of holding in reserve because we want to come back to the aquatics at some point. For a lot of it, we want to keep that as, pardon the pun, a deep mystery.
And to a great degree, I will have to say, 1879 writer meetings consist of a bunch of people throwing ideas, and then me and Alex, the other writer, and everyone else going, okay, they're being scary.
We got
again.
Dan now. Dan's from the UK. I don't know exactly where.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, half the time we're just having fun throwing ideas around and coming up with crazy stuff.
And I keep doing my best to sneak more and more Earthdawn references into the product. There's some nice hidden stuff going to be turning up in the Samsung books.
Which again, I am 100% for. I like tying the two lines together. I like finding those connections for people to find them.
On the question that was about, do we know where the immortal elves are? I don't think there's a lot in official products, but I certainly have a list that I check regularly, and I'm working it out.
There's some stuff from the old material that worked out where they were, but hasn't been published. Some of that I want to keep. Some of that we're gonna kind of jump around with. So they may have had some references to certain things in previous blog posts. Again, before I took over, all the posts are saved, but I will be honest, I can't memorize all of them. There's just only so much that will fit in my head. But that is all things that, yes, we have an eye for. We're looking to incorporate those things. So you pretty much everything that you all as fans look at, yeah, that's pretty much all it is we're fans of this stuff too, and we're just kind of having fun with it and seeing where we can go with it. I'll catch back up with some of the, where did we diverge here? Because I went on a train rant for a while. Will we have magic trains? You could potentially. Right now, it's too expensive looking for like true elements and that sort of thing to really be able to have a magically fueled train, but you could potentially have one. And I may end up writing one for, like, say, the Queen. Would probably have a magic engine, so they don't have to stop for fueling. They can just keep moving. Trade source book. I did have the thought of doing a vehicle source book at some point. I don't know where exactly I would fit it in. I have a title: Blood, Sweat, and Gears. And I don't know where exactly I would fit it in, but I have that thought. I've
Love
had
it.
the thought of doing modeling for some of the engines and that sort of thing. Not even necessarily something to sell, just to have, make a single model and put on display. I would love to do one for the Camelback engine we put in the Fort Alice book, because as soon as Camelbacks are weird, but they have such an interesting history. And as soon as I had started looking into Camelbacks, I was like, oh god, yes, I have to put that into the book. I will. And so this is where I was talking about with the visual aids. I will get you the picture from the book. So for anybody who doesn't have the Fort Alice source book handy, that's the one I'm talking about. So I will refrain from going into a whole delve in the train mechanics and how things work with Camelbacks and why they're different, unless somebody wants me to. But even if they do, I will circle back to it because I had a pretty long train rant for a bit. Let's see. Yeah, getting back into the conversation, Joel, don't encourage him. Yeah, no, I could sit and talk about trains all day. To ride Grove board. If we could figure out something for it, I might. That would be an interesting one to do. We do have the big rail map for the Grove, so you could do that and then just have everybody pick a different line that they're building up. Let's see. Oh, and then you got into the airships. Okay, so I'm caught up there. There was at least one more from the general chat. We get back to there. Are people of Earth familiar with Thera Atlantis? So in the 1879 realm of things, it's pretty much how the real world legends would be as far as Atlantis is concerned. They wouldn't necessarily know about Thera. Um, no real specific legends tying to how the history with Earth Dawn and everything like that had gone down. Of course, the immortal elves and the dragons know all about it, but there's not a whole lot that the general, your every workaday person on Earth is going to really know about it. Again, great topic, but he wanted to have a game line. You run a campaign that delved into some of those things. Yeah, that would be a really fun game. Uh, really fun campaign aspect. I mean, you could the movie Atlantis: The Lost Empire. You could basically follow a lot of that because it's really about that sale. You'll create those sort of uh, weird science submarines and bring them down into the depths to go find Thera. Uh, could be very interesting. Be a fun concept for somebody to do. So yeah, by all means, if somebody wants to write a game for that, go for it. That would be an interesting topic. And that was the last of the questions prepped there. Um, I I think I've pretty much caught up on the conversation so far in the main room chat. If anybody, again, if anybody has more questions on things, by all means, jump in. Let me know where we want to go with things. Any more plans for any of those small character pack products? Yes, we are continuing with the personalities. So the remaining ones, they are all written. They will continue to be released. The plan is to try and release them on a monthly basis, and then we will have. So there are 12 in total. We will have a final printed book eventually that will print all 12, and there will also be a bonus 13th that's included in the final book. So you'll and then when you pick it up as the printed book, you'll be able to get all of them included and have all the printed character sheets and everything like that. So those will be continuing to finish that up. The original plan after that was to try and do some ones for villain personalities. I haven't that idea is kind of on the shelf. I have not developed into doing those more. Been focused more on writing source books and getting those pushed out because that's new material that needs to be developed. Again, I need writers. So we got a bunch of ideas for things that we would like to do, and not enough people to be able to work on it and get it pushed out in a reasonable time frame. I could assign one person to work on a source book each, and we could have 5 things in development at once. But then it's going to take us 2 years for one person to write an entire book. So you got to put multiple people on a particular project to be able to get it done in a timely fashion. If I can get more writers, I can get more products going, multi-threading, and we're going to have to divide our forces here at some point uh, to try and keep things up. As of right now, with the current schedule, we don't sell enough product with 1879 to be able to do a Kickstarter for one book. We've got to do at least 2 books to be able to split the printing between them in order to cover the costs. If we can increase sales more, then we could potentially do a Kickstarter that releases a single book and push it that way, and then be able to put all of our eggs into that basket. But I still want to have multiple books going at a time. Even if we do get to that point, I want to have enough writers so we can do multiple books. So that way, the next one is hot on its heels. As of right now, we're putting everybody on one book, and then 6 months later, we got to have everybody on the next one and try and push. I would really like us to, if we could get more people, where we could spread it out more, and that would allow us to take more time to get things pushed out, pushed and done and written in the state where we want them. Um, but so much of it we kind of have to push and scramble, as we're really seeing with the Samset source book, particularly because we have to hit that hard deadline with Gen Con. And Ross talked about that a little bit in the previous one with the different deadlines and how there's a specific order that everything has to go through in order to get it done. You get the product written, we get it through editing. Once it's through editing, we can start on the layout, but everything, all the written material is done. At that point, we could do the Kickstarter while the layout's being finished, and in art and everything like that can come in as the Kickstarter gets done. And then once all of that's done, then we can release the PDF. The PDF, it means the product is finished and it's off to the printers, and then we're dealing with the the physical production and all of those headaches. But at that point, it's out of our hands; it's on the other production schedules. But from our end, we have the product done, and then it's just following up to make sure that everything gets done and gets sent out to all of you. If I can get more people to write for me, we can get more things in the pipeline and keep that moving constantly. So yeah, if anybody hearing any of this has ideas, they want to jump in, and if you can contribute for the writing, jump in, reach out, let us know. We're looking for people. If I could find somebody who could just sit and write personalities, that would be another product that we could do, just a steady trickle of releases, and then eventually we do one big product at the end. So yeah, to circle back to the original question, yes, that's something we want to do more. We're finishing up the current set. After that, it's going to depend on where we can get writing and where we can fit it in with the production schedule. But I would like to do more of those. Anybody else have other things they want to jump in? Questions, comments, things you want to see more of, things you want to see less of? I had no idea if I was going to be able to fill the full 2 hours here anyway, so. There's more being typed. Bear Garrett's. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that we want to see for other things to develop out more like that. Oh, I want to develop more for the steampunk gizmos and gadgets and that sort of thing. I am a firm believer in the power of stuff when it comes to games and equipment and that sort of thing. Oh, it's 50 minutes into the Bear Garrett's. So the thing with the Garrett's, yeah, okay, if we're jumping into the trade talk, like I said, I am more than willing to jump into those. The thing with the Garrett's, the problem is the connections between them. And they just don't, you have to have the flexible connections because they are articulated, and they're just weird. Not necessarily bad, but they're weird in how they function. For anybody who doesn't know, let me see if I can find a good reference picture. Actually, I think we used the one off of Wikipedia. So I will copy. I think we actually used this one in the book because they were talked about a little bit in the GM's Companion, if I remember correctly. Uh, so yeah, you could potentially put it on the tender. So the Bear Garrett's for these engines, if you want to take a look, these are some of the first articulated engines, and what they had a so you would have a water tender on the front, you'd have your fuel tender on the back, and you would have powered wheels under each of them that would push the engine around. They're articulated where the front and back connect, so that they can bend around curves and that sort of thing. They were used a lot within the mining operations primarily. And yes, as you mentioned, they are good for narrow gauge railroads. Uh, just narrow gauge, you would typically have more where you need to do more of the twisty, windy tracks, get into tighter spaces, be able to handle the crazy, weird hills. Yeah, narrow gauge does a bunch of weird crap. It really does. Um, and then also just to have it cheaper because you have you know, the tracks aren't as wide. You don't have to have as much material to build them. Um, but yeah, narrow gauge does a whole bunch of weird stuff. But yes, you did have the yeah, it's not that weird. Not all narrow gauge networks were weird, but there are there are a lot of weird things that can happen on narrow gauge, and it also depends on which gauge you're dealing with. The narrower the gauge, the weirder stuff they do. So, like, if you got a 3 foot narrow gauge, yeah, that's still fairly close to standard. You can pretty much handle it. Yeah, and like I said, a lot of the times the weird stuff is cool. That's why I talked about with the camelback. They're weird. I wanted them in the game. So, but yes, there are references to Garrett engines, but as the problem with those largely is the flex points because they have to be flexible and articulated. They did not have very good fittings and piping to be able to handle that developed at this particular point. Now we do have the potentially within 1879 where we could develop that out further. You could have better ones, but that was their primary failure point is just as the the two tenders fluctuate and it bends around, you're going to lose your steam connections because those pipes need fittings. Uh, there is also the problem just of the weight distribution because you want your weight over the driving wheels. You want to be able to push as much weight down so you're getting as much traction as possible. As you can see on in the picture with the Garrett engines, it's kind of distributed. You're really putting the weight dependent upon the fuel and water supply rather than the boiler as it would on a traditional engine. So as they continue to use water and fuel, they get less and less traction as they go along. Uh, Whereas if you keep it directly under the boiler, you got a whole bunch of steel in the boiler that isn't going to fluctuate. And as long as the engine has water, the water level really doesn't fluctuate that much. So you continue to power it there. Same problem came up when they tried doing powered tenders. And they would do that for a while. And the idea is, sounds good on paper, where you put, it's just dead weight dragging around, but it's attached to the engine all the time. Throw some extra power wheels on there and run that through. But those points of articulation, the additional mechanical costs of involving it, plus the weight fluctuating, so you lose traction the longer the engine runs, just means that it's not as reliable once you get into the real world conditions. But yeah, all fun, different fun things to deal with. Eventually, they did get to start using bigger articulated engines, like you have the most famous example being the big boy. Uh, you would have just where the boiler got so huge, it was to the point where it would no longer fit on a static frame, and it had to have articulation with the driving wheels just to be able to bend around a curve. Unless you were Russia and wish you had, I think it was a 414-4, if I remember correctly. Just the massive, massive train. Let me see if I can find that one. I think it was a four. I think it was 414-4, something crazy like that. Yes, there it is. That's a model, but it still gets the point across. So this was an engine that Russia actually built, where it had that many freaky driving wheels, and this is a static frame. So that does not go around a curve very well. What they had to do to handle that for the most part was have a lot of blind drivers. And if you look close at the picture, you can see it. So what a blind driver is, most train wheels will have a flange on the back so that it keeps the train wheels as it starts to push into the rail. The flange keeps it from rolling off. A blind driver has no flange, and it's rather than having the usual conical shape for a train wheel. It just it has sort of a crown shape to it. So it will continue to provide tractive effort, but it's not going to catch on the flange. And the idea being that as it goes around the curve, the blind drivers can kind of float over to the wrong side of the track, while the blind drivers keep the train centered. But of course, this thing was so massive, it derailed constantly. And if you look real close at that model, you can see the first two and last two drivers are flanges, but the middle ones are blind, where they would just kind of roll over the track. And so yeah, that engine just derailed constantly. It was a beast in terms of how much power it had, but it could not navigate a curve to save its life. So this was where they eventually broke it up and they started doing articulated engines, where you would have two different sets of power drivers in here. I'll bring in. Let's grab a good picture of the big boy, because that's the big famous one. Oh, that's a tiny picture. Why is that one so tiny? Hang on. I think did it copy the image. There we go. I think I copied the link rather than copy the actual picture. So there you can see it in a little bit bigger scale. So they had the big articulated duplex engine. So you can see there's another set of pistons in the middle so that the other set of drivers have their own independent power. And those drivers are articulated. So they will bend and they can rotate in a direction different than the other set of drivers. That allows them to go around a curve, and the boiler just kind of spans the distance between them. It's still on a rigid frame, but that frame has the articulated drivers to rotate around. So that way it can float around the curves and actually manage to move and navigate there. They actually did come up with triplex engines, where basically they would run. It was a duplex, but then it also had a set of drivers under the tender. Those ran into steaming problems, just because you there's a certain limit where you can't have a boiler large enough to generate enough steam to power that many sets of driving wheels. Uh, it's just physically you eventually get physically constrained in how much power you can generate. So the duplex is really the most successful and the largest steam engine in the world. And these largest successful steam engine in the world. We'll put it that way. And just how much power that you can generate. Now, 1879 is a long ways off from being able to generate that much power. We definitely don't have duplex engines. Uh, but tying in with how I was talking about before, with how the balance goes between the firebox and the boiler, just eventually you keep generating a larger and larger boiler. You need a larger and larger firebox. You need additional wheels to sit underneath it to hold it up. Sorry about that. I had to cough and didn't want to do that in everybody's ears. But yeah, so I had debated on whether I was going to do a separate train talk. I think that's kind of what we've developed into at this point in the conversation. But back on the Camelback, because I kind of skipped over how that one. Now the Camelback engine that we have, this was actually a design that I entirely came up with. Now Camelbacks in and of themselves are not my unique design. The way they worked, the Camelback engines were designed. They were usually done in anthracite mines, and they would have anthracite is a fuel, but it's a very weak fuel, particularly compared to coal. So you need a lot of it to be able to power a boiler. At the time, they didn't have trailing wheels and everything set up to really properly support a boiler that large, and they didn't really even have the and have a firebox that could hold it up. What you'd end up having would be a firebox that huge. It would be kept over the driving wheels, but it would be so big that the engineer would not be able to see. So in order to get around that, they put the cab on top of the boiler. So the engineer sits on top of the cab. The uh, the tender's attached to the back with the firebox, and the fireman just continues to shovel coal or anthracite or what have you from there. And here I will get. Let me grab a reference picture there. Here's a good one to see. So this is one without the tender attached, but you can see how massive the firebox is. And so to get around that, so the fireman would ride on the tender, which again isn't attached in this picture, and then would have access to that massive firebox to just keep throwing fuel at it. And then the engineer goes in the cab that goes on top of the boiler. So they were effective at burning up a fuel that otherwise would have just gone to waste. So it saved the railroad a lot of money in doing that. But they were very tall, very top heavy. The engineers were very concerned about the linkages for the driving wheels potentially breaking. And if it did, it would go straight out of the cab and damage them. They would be threatened. The tender was open to the elements, so the fireman was pretty much just exposed no matter where he went. So they were very uncomfortable for the crews to handle. Plus, it was right on top of the boiler, so the engineers right in the middle of all that heat. So they tend to be used very much once they started to develop better fireboxes that could sustain the fuel better or sustain the steam better. The development came within 1879 with the owner for the Pennsylvania Railroad when he came over to tour the Grove, and he saw the soldiers that had been getting ambushed and hit and when they were out on patrols, and realized, hey, this old design that we had for the camelbacks that raises up the cab. If you built it up large enough, that's a perfect mobile firing position for a set of soldiers to be able to sit within, and you could just use the engine as a scout to go around, patrolling the rails and secure everything. So at the design we've got, they have a massive plow at the front, with four unpowered wheels. So it's a 464, so four unpowered wheels at the front. You get a massive uh, smoke box that comes through. And the reason for having that additional size on the smoke box is to create more draft. The better draft you pull, the more air you're flowing through the firebox, the better you can cause the fuel to burn. So particularly when you're dealing with a cheap fuel like that, you can pull a lot more fire, get it a lot higher, and get a lot more power out. The other thing, which is kind of hard to see in the front of this picture, there is a big steam cannon on the front. So they will actually use that as a weapon when they're patrolling around if they need to have a soldier go out front and shoot. You then have the soldiers up on the top. They have their benches where they can create firing position, and you'll notice the boxes that are underneath the main cab. This is actually a tank engine rather than having the water secured at the back with the fuel source. Making it a tank engine puts the water in the way. Number one, that's creating additional armor to protect the engine. But two, if something happens with the linkage that protects having the tanks there, that would protect the occupants inside from having anything fly up and hit them, because not only has it got the steel from the tanks, it's got all the water inside that would block all of that. Also puts additional weight lower on the engine, so it helps prevent some of the tip over problems that they would have, particularly if they have to go around curves at high speeds and that sort of thing, since it lowers the center of gravity. And then in the back, we covered over the tender. You again, since you're not having to carry water, you can just cover that over. Contained inside, the fireman is now protected from the elements, and that gives you a sense of cover in case you come under fire. So these things they can pull a train. They're designed to set up to do that, but mostly they're used as scouting tanks to go ahead of large trains, just to secure the line, scout ahead. Mostly look for mole crabs because they tend to be a problem in the grove, uh, and have those things deployed all over. In the we have the big damn hero scenario, and the group gets to go in one of these engines as they head out for their patrol. All right, I am starting to run out of steam myself, and I think we're winding down here on the group. I'll give it one more ask. Is there any other questions? Anything else anybody wants to cover? Otherwise, I think we can probably call this one early, and then we'll leave it for when the next event starts.
Well, Brad, since we're coming to it, and I wanted to wait till this was done before I started asking this. Given all the stuff I'm working on, that 1879 will be a part of it. Is there anything you want to see specifically within those set of apps?
And this is one that I'm working on my side as well. I do want to see a nice character folio and something that we can have where you could have where it will tie in with a live editable version. Either we create it as an app or something like that. Again, I'm working on the layout for that right now. I'm testing that partially with the actual play, getting the chance to play through. I want this to be something that we could both put in print, so somebody could order a print character folio. We did those for Earth Dawn way back several years ago, uh, and basically you just had it as like a spiral bound booklet where you could have the pages you could go through. But I would like that to also work as a web app, something that you could put on a tablet, a phone, whatever, to be able to do. So that's one that I know I have more work that I have to do on my side to make that a reality, but that's one that I want to see happen.
Well, then it's good to know that was actually already in the works.
Yep. So I know we got progress there. I'll open that up if there's things that other people want to see for apps or development or things there. By all means. I think there was a couple of people before that have talked about trying to do just for the minis games and that sort of thing. And I think we were talking about that with Demo World, but also with 1879.
Now, the Maps of London, correct me if I'm wrong, was that for 1879 or for Earth Dawn?
Maps of London is for 1879.
All right, so what about...
yes. That will also be one.
Yeah, I know we talked about a way to get those Maps of London online and make it so people can view in, zoom in, and do all the rest of that fun stuff a la Google Maps.
Yep, and be able to create like custom waypoints, plan out routes and that sort of thing.
All right, now think about, since all the games you've run from a GM perspective, is there anything that would make your life easier while managing a game?
Ooh, for a short-term one-off, which honestly is what I've run the most of for lately, because I haven't been able to get a full campaign running. Character trackers are nice, just for being able to do stuff for like even just within a particular combat encounter, you could have one where you could tap over, have the basic stats for your player characters, and then being able to tab over to your your creatures. You just drag and drop them in, be able to handle initiatives and tracking health and that sort of thing. That's one of the things that you just always have to keep track of. But then having like a tab where you could put in your player character stats, so I don't have to ask somebody what's your physical defense. I've got it on the app as long as it's continuing to be up to date. Things like that are useful. That's probably regardless of the scale. That would probably be one that I could use if I were to do a large scale campaign again. Project management software essentially. Basically just something with a calendar where I can plan ahead for specific events and know when things are, when I start laying pipe or when the players start off a chain of events and where things are going to end up, 6 months, a year down the road. I can start a thread and I can say, check on this in 3 months once you start playing through, and you can see where this is developed out to.
All right, Andy, feel free to jump in because I know you run an 1879 game as well. And for those that are here that didn't know about it, the mention of the Google Maps Maps of London that was not previously publicly made available or mentioned.
We did mention that was something we wanted to develop, but we did not have that at the time when we were releasing the maps.
Right. As of right now, it's very early stages of planning. It's on the list of things to do, and I think I figured out a way to do it. So it is coming down the pipe. Something else I was thinking of is, and some of the ideas I'm coming up with are stuff I had about 10, 15 years ago when I was working on a G20 to do stuff. So I'm bringing in some old ideas. A tool kind of like Tabletop Simulator or Roll20 of those with all the map and all the characters on it, to where the GM sees everything, obviously. The players, they can make edits, indications being like, we've gone this way, or make note of traps, and they can actually see all the lines of sight if needed. But have it be pre-made with London, all the surrounding areas, have it random, whatever's needed. Would that be of interest?
See, now for me personally, in large scale maps, yes, I like having those so that people can see where they're going, for like the streets and that's in countries and that sort of thing. Personally, I don't do a lot for small scale like combat encounters, going into a dungeon or building or wherever like that. Sometimes I'll set one up, but I tend to do more theater of mind because and that's just my personal style. I know there are quite a few people who would prefer to have those sort of maps, so I think that's definitely something worthwhile to develop. It's just not something that I personally use a lot.
That's fair. It's why I'm asking these questions, because you're the lead. I want to make sure I get your input on this, obviously.
Oh yeah, no, from a product standpoint, definitely something worthwhile to develop. Just me personally, it's not something that I really use.
All right, I'm trying to think if there's anything else something that I've thought of for all these products that may benefit, that may be specific to 1879. Sadly, I think I'm out of steam now.
Yeah, like I said, I was kind of running out of steam there as well.
So how about to the rest of y'all that are listening in? Is there anything that y'all would like to see? I'm sorry, but I'm not coding crickets into the game.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I had not opened that up in the writers' discussions, Joel. I don't even know if you would have ever thought along those lines. We've been so focused on the writing aspect of things, I hadn't really gotten into other products.
Oh, you got time. You got plenty of time.
There's nothing that's springing to mind other than good map resources that's springing to mind offhand, but I'll have a think and try and see what there is, if I can think of anything that could be useful.
Manny, I see you there. Yes, we've thought about doing a Maps of the Grove and setting something like that up. That is something we have discussed. I don't know when exactly it would come up in the product discussion. Obviously, those maps would all have to be completely generated from scratch, whereas the London maps we were able to get from, we were able to redo from previous cartography and cleanup and that sort of thing. I'm not really an artist, so I don't know which is faster, to create it from scratch or try to clean them up. That's when we'd have to talk back to Marcus. Marcus is the one who did the original or did the maps for Maps of London. And he's kind of our main cartography side of things, but those would have to be developed. But that is something that we've talked about. I don't know when that would come into effect, but we would want to do it, and if we do that, we would want to do both a physical product as well as doing an app to go along with it when we get to that point. Maps of London was kind of our first experimental foray into setting that up. I think it turned out to be fairly successful. This Gen Con's really going to tell us a lot because this is the we had the initial run where we just had the handful of air freight ones. It's that will now have been out for a year, and we'll have it this one. I want to see how well that develops and how much more attention we've gotten. Uh, but I think it's been fairly well successful, and I think if we can continue to push through and get enough people interested in it where we get the sales, then it's something worth pursuing and doing more for that. But yes, so there have been some growth maps, but we would want to develop them so that they're in the correct scale for everything. There are some adjustments that have to be made on the Fort Alice map. We had to scale that specifically for the books, so that things would fit in there. So we got in that regard, but we have the general layout for things. But then of course, once we have the actual maps developed, then we could put them into an app. Yeah, Joel, I don't know if you'll have any suggestions specifically for British culture side of thing that could be useful as an app. Well, we can get a translator.
Instructions to how to make a decent cup of tea. No salt water, thank you.
Don't we just put it in a coffee mug and put it in the microwave?
And I was just starting to like you. Yeah, actually, a currency converter, because pound, shilling, and pence. I'm lucky in that I have a player who used pound, shilling, and pence when they were still a thing in this country, and have learnt to use it.
I do have that on the character folio. I have just a written conversion rate for those listed. So obviously, when we get the app set up, you'll be able to develop between those. I don't know that we might even be able to put an exchange rate set up in there. So if somebody went over to the States, they could convert it. They would have their existing money and they could convert it just within the character sheet. Of course, we'd have to look up the historic conversion rates and basically probably just make that like a drop down. But possibilities for things that could be done. But I was thinking for a translator, just type in a modern day English phrase and put it into Victorian era British.
Something to track social standings. That's what we need more of.
The scandal tracker.
Exactly.
Basically, we're going to create the 1879 equivalent of Twitter.
Well, there's a chance,
As I said, going into the 1879 meetings, I typically am not opposed to most of the crazy ideas. There's only been a handful where I'm just like, no, we're not doing that. That's too much. All right, well, thanks for tuning in, Patrick. I see you signing out there. Yeah, I think we're going to be wrapping up here shortly. Andy, are you still there? She might have stepped off for dinner. Although I see she's unmuted. I have not gotten into Anthony Trollope myself. Actually, I need to get through Sherlock Holmes. I've read them bits and pieces, but I need to read them all back to back. That is one thing that I've been considering doing, since most of Holmes is going into public domain. I'm very strongly considering writing Holmes-style novels set within the 1879 universe. Of course, that would be something I would have to find time to do, but I think it could be an interesting tie-in. All right. Well, I think we've pretty much wound down at this point. I know Andy hasn't responded yet. I think she's out eating. But I'm going to call an end for the meeting here where we're at for the moment. Again, thank you everybody for attending, and we'll have to crop the video some to get into that one. But as always, if there are any questions, any comments, anything else 1879 related, by all means, please reach out on the Discord. I try to pop in there fairly regularly. I've got it set up to give me alerts whenever somebody posts. And yeah, I hope everybody enjoyed, and we will catch you in the next clip. Joel, I know you're coming up next with your British talk. I don't know if you want to start that now or if you want to wait and go for your regular time.
I shall wait for my regular time and just take a moment or two to gather all my thoughts.
Okay, that is totally fine. So then I think we're just going to leave the channel muted here, and then Andy can stop and start the recording once she gets back.
Yep.
Alrighty. Well, have a good one, everybody. I'm just going to be muted in here, but I'll be hanging around. I need to go sort dinner out for myself.